A global outcry against corporate greed has risen up in almost 1,000 cities worldwide. People have taken their anger to the streets, saying their governments have been taken over by big business. The Occupy Wall Street movement began in New York, quickly spreading across the US to Los Angeles, Denver and Washington, among others. It's since gone global, with Asia joining in the demands for change. In Europe too, hundreds of cities are taking part in the protests. Well, let's now take a closer look at what's happening around the world with our correspondents. We've got Marina Portnaya in New York, Ivor Bennett in London, Daniel Bushell in Brussels and Irina Galushko in Madrid. And first we go live to Marina. Now, Marina, there's a huge turnout in the streets there in New York. What are people saying there now that their movement has become so big?
Well, as you mentioned, this turnout here in New York is the largest that it's been in the past 4 weeks. Let's remember, it was 4 weeks ago when the Occupy Wall Street movement started off here in Zuccotti Park, where I'm standing by Wall Street. Now, what these activists are saying right now is they feel that their movement is persevering. They feel that they are moving forward in a victorious kind of way now that the Occupy movement has gone global. Thousands of people have been in and around Lower Manhattan showing their support for the Occupy movement or taking part in it all day long. Thousands, as I mentioned, in the park where I'm standing. There were hundreds that went to Chase Bank earlier in the day to withdraw their money and close their accounts. Hundreds, if not 1,000, have gathered in another area of Manhattan in Washington Square Park to also echo the sentiments that have been voiced by the activists of the Occupy Wall Street movement. And just about an hour ago, we received reports that at least 20 people that went into a Citibank to close their accounts were arrested by plainclothes police officers inside Citibank. But we have been speaking to all those that have come out onto the streets today to voice their anger, their frustration with the way that the U.S. system is run. Here's a little bit of what they had to say.
I have no faith in Obama. I don't have faith in anybody in Congress. All they do, their Congress is bought and paid for by special interests. They're the ones who control the government. They're the ones who write legislation.
Right now, corporations are kind of running the government by funding political campaigns, and then those politicians get into office. And of course, they're going to do what's in the corporation's best interest because that's who's funding them and that's who's giving them money. And the people are kind of left in the dust.
People aren't getting what they deserve. People are still struggling. They work their full-time jobs. They work overtime, and yet there's people who can't even get an hour a week to work.
Now, these are the sentiments that have been voiced here by the Occupy movement for 4 weeks now. But in the next few hours, we are expecting to see thousands gather in Times Square. That is where they are taking this demonstration. They will be focusing also on the amount of money the U.S. has spent overseas on wars, the decisions that are made when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, and the decisions that these activists say are the wrong ones, the ones that they say are bleeding the country dry, bleeding the common American dry. And while the U.S. leaders, of course, they believe are acting in their interests, not in the best interest of all Americans.
Marina, thanks very much indeed for that live update from New York. Marina Portnaya there. So, marches in the U.S. peaceful at the moment, as we've just been hearing. But what about Europe? Ivor Bennett, he's in London. Ivor, we saw huge public unrest there just a few months ago. How are things looking where you are at the moment?
For the large part, the protests today have been very peaceful, but the atmosphere here has just suddenly, in the last few moments, got a lot more tense. That's because the police, which are still in vast numbers here, and you can see the line of police vans behind me, the protesters are gathered behind there. The police have been trying to disperse the last few remaining 100 hardcore protesters from the steps in front of the cathedral. They say they're trying to disperse them peacefully. They set up a cordon around them. They're not letting anyone into that cordon, but they're wanting people to leave. But as they started to disperse those people on the pavement, the protesters, they didn't want to move. They say they have a right to remain on the sidewalk there and to carry out their protest peacefully. When they didn't move, the actions did escalate. There was a lot of pushing and shoving. Arrests were made. I think you can see some of those pictures now, a lot of shouting. Police have brought out dogs as well, and as the crowd chanted "Shame on you" to the police, the atmosphere got a lot more tense. Now, we're not quite sure what's going to happen now, because what the police want to do is disperse these protesters, because they say this is private property and they have no right to remain here. Now, as for the protesters, earlier today there were reports of almost 3,000 people being present here. There were certainly well over 1,000. Talking to them in terms of an end goal, they're kind of, that's a little bit disorganised, but talking to them you soon realise that's not really the point. The point of why they're here today is because it's just to register their anger, and that's really what's galvanising all of them. Anger that their money, taxpayers' money, is continuing to be spent on bailing out banks. They're angry that the people in charge of those banks are still getting bonuses, and they see that as the architects of the economic disaster as being rewarded. And they're also just generally angry at the way the country's being run. And the phrase that's being continuously used today in terms of a slogan for today's action is "We are the 99%. They say that they make up the vast majority of this country, yet they have no control of how the country is being run. So they say this is their chance to strike back, and this is what some of them had to say.
I've bought sleeping apparatus. I've bought tents and sleeping bags. So, as long as I can secure food, then a longer stay as possible.
The slogan that began on Wall Street, "We are the 99%, echoes in Britain as well, because we know that the bankers and the bosses are getting bailed out by the government, and we're being forced to pay the price for that.
Speaking to people, it is really amazing that you really get a sense that they think they're really beginning to have a say here, and something will really change now. So they're really digging in their heels. There's people with stoves, tents, they're setting up camp here. They're aware they might not be able to spend the night here, but they're prepared to go somewhere else, because they really think this is the start of something that could change something similar to the Occupy Wall Street, as we've heard from Marina Portnaya in New York, and they're prepared to stay for as long as it takes until they have their voice heard.
Ivor, thanks very much indeed for that. Ivor Bennett live in London. Well, Europeans have been focusing their anger on the centre of the EU's governance and politics, and that, of course, is Brussels. And Daniel Bushell is there. Daniel, protesters from around Europe where you are, does it look like the politicians might take any notice whatsoever of this movement?
There's a revolutionary mood here. The crowd, despite the cold, is getting bigger and it's getting angrier, shouting slogans against the banks and the governments which keep rescuing them with public money. Authorities first tried to ban this grouping, saying there was no running water for them, which many saw as an excuse to stop them getting together. But they have finally given in to the weight of numbers, and they now plan an all-night alternative parliament, what they're calling, which is for the people, in the interests of the people, and not the financial elite. Now, the latest scandal is Dexia, one of Belgium's largest lenders, which has been bailed out just now by the government to the tune estimated of costing €5,000 per taxpayer, alongside the CEO of that bank being promised for last year a bonus of €600,000 in practice for practically leading the bank to the brink of collapse. Now, the people have also been shocked by the EU's reaction. When he was asked about the significance of the protest, a spokesperson for the European Commission just answered, "What does it mean to us?" The EU Employment Commissioner joked the protesters should go to Frankfurt instead of Brussels, Frankfurt being the home of the European Central Bank, central to this euro crisis at the moment. It's an international movement. People are coming here from all across Europe. People have actually marched for months by foot, for example, from the likes of Spain to get here, seeing Brussels really as the heart of the EU and the problem here.
Thanks indeed, Daniel Bushell there in Brussels. And talking of Spain, we now go to Irina Galushko in Madrid, the capital of a country which has Europe's worst unemployment rate, with something like over 40% of young people out of work at the moment. Irina, it looks like the size of the crowd is really building there, certainly building up from where we saw you last time.
Definitely, that is absolutely right. Well, as you may hear this, your people are really I think they are making their voices heard. You have to think about the fact that the Occupy Wall Street movement may have spurred protests over the last several weeks, but there are some who believe that those people in New York were actually inspired by the protests which began here in Spain in the middle of May of this year. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of young people, not just in Madrid, but in cities and towns all across the country, were protesting the austerity measures taken by their government. They were protesting against the fact that a lot of people have been left without jobs, that a lot of people are forced to move out of their homes. And by looks of it, these people who are on the streets of Madrid today, they believe that their voices are in fact being heard and they are making a difference in the world. Let's have a listen to what they had to say earlier.
Of course, global utopia isn't possible. Changes take time. But we want those who are at the top to understand that common people want change and how much we want it.
We want a transparent, horizontal society. We saw the Arab Spring, then the Spanish summer, the American autumn, and now we'll face a global winter.
This may sound like quite a big goal, but you have to understand that these people who have gathered here, they actually have pretty much everything to lose. A lot of these people are ages 24 to 35. They have gotten their education, they have invested money into it. They are trying to build a family, trying to build homes, and they're robbed of that opportunity because the country, Spain, is in dire situation right now. It's been downgraded on almost weekly basis. The economic situation is incredibly bad, and these people here, for them, it's literally a matter of survival, of making a difference, of convincing the government, not just their own government, but governments world over, that something has to be done because they really need to see that there is a future for them. And they are going to stay here and they're going to make their demands heard, and they are filled with that hope that they can make a difference because they need to continue to fight for something in order to survive, in order to make ends meet.
Irina Galushko in Madrid, Daniel Bushell in Brussels, Ivor Bennett in London, and Marina Portnaya in New York. Thank you all for the moment.